Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Boy, it's great to see such a good turnout. It might have something to do with the fact that the whole world is watching South Carolina right now. And everyone may want to actually know what the mood of America is. We know what the mood of New Hampshire is and Iowa, but how about the rest of the world? So tonight, that's what we're here to find out from Peter Hart. I wanted to welcome all of you on behalf of the Riley Institute at Furman University to tonight's talk. This is part of a broader program called the Woodrow Wilson Fellowship Program that the Riley Institute runs every year. It brings thought leaders to campus here for a week of residence, and these individuals get into classrooms, give public talks, and generally mingle with our students in ways that you can't normally do if you're just watching this person on television or hearing a talk at a distance. And so Peter has been in a number of classes. I've been hearing the chatter in the hallways that this is one of the most engaging individuals who can really teach us something. So we're in for a treat tonight. I do want to remind everyone that this is one of our Cultural Life program events. And one of the things that we do through our CLP program is bring important but sometimes controversial topics to the campus. Now, when we talk politics, we are naturally in the realm of controversy. So one of the things we want to remember is that we are in the middle of a campaign, but we want to remain civil in our discourse. Now, that's just for the audience, not the candidates. They're allowed to be uncivil, but no, we want everyone to be civil, and so just be aware of that as we get into the Q&A later on. Well, it's my privilege to introduce to you Secretary and Governor Dick Riley. He was governor of South Carolina for 2 terms and then served under President Bill Clinton as Secretary of Education for 8 years. He has lent his name to the Institute, the Riley Institute, and he continues to be one of the most respected, if not the most respected leaders in South Carolina. Secretary Riley.
Thank you so much, Brent, and I'm going to try to give a civil introduction. And I know you're in for an interesting evening. How very timely and fortunate now to have Peter Hart here to talk about the mood of America during this 2016 presidential campaign year, and what a campaign year it is. I've always believed that the key to any successful endeavor is quality research, data, analysis, followed by a careful implementation of a strategic plan. And all of us have dealt with that in one way or another in our business or in our life or in our university experience. But the key to getting to that first step, the quality research, data, and analysis, it absolutely requires for a person or a group to be good listeners. And that's very important. And that is what makes Peter Hart so successful. Whether the client is a political candidate, a business like NBC News, a Wall Street Journal, a nonprofit organizations, or whatever, he listens very closely to what the client wants to achieve, and then he goes out and listens closely to the views of the whole variety of audiences that will be important to the client's initiative. We call that polling, of course. Peter and his associates do that through all forms of communication, person to person, in phone discussions, online, whatever it takes to get a factual data base. And then he helps the client develop a strategic communication plan. And then the client's job, of course, is to get their mission accomplished. Peter Hart is a master listener as well as an effective researcher and strategist. Some specific information about his background can be in your program, but I can assure you that he's widely regarded as one of the top analysts of public opinion, the top pollster in the United States. Now, while Peter's involvement in political campaigns has always been to advise candidates, generally he supports in his work, political work, moderate Democrats, but he's very careful to have a strong reputation of being totally nonpartisan in his basic research and his basic analysis. Indeed, Peter most often is referred to as the dean of this generation of pollsters. Anybody in Washington can tell you that. I know all about Peter's experience from personal experience. I hate to take some of his time, but I really want to tell a little bit about my personal experience with him. A few years ago, really a few decades ago, it was in 1978, and I decided to run for governor. I had been a reformer in the state Senate, one of the leaders of what they call the Young Turks. Nick Theodore is here, Harry Chapman, I'm sure others. We were part of a small group that were so-called reformers back then. And I had very few funds, but I decided to invest just about everything I had in a top young pollster who was well known throughout the country at that time, Peter Hart. He came in, he did a thorough poll, and then we had a meeting after it was all done down in Columbia one December morning. It was on Sunday, I think. Cold, rainy, windy. I came in excited about what the poll was going to say. Well, the poll said that I had 4%. That's bad. Now, Peter tells that 3%, but it was 4. I remember that very carefully. Then, after I got that information, I and my supporters were, of course, shocked. Margaret Bethea, Nan McHenry, and George McHenry, where is Margaret here? There's Margaret, who happens to live in Anderson now, and her husband, George. She was my campaign manager, and a very good one. So we suffered through that poll. Then, all of a sudden, I realized that I said, Peter, what do we do? I mean, what do you do with 4%? No, not much money, not much anything. And he said, well, you have two choices. Now, this is where I want you to understand Peter Hart. He said, one choice is Brantley Harvey was the lead candidate. He had 35%. Understand that? And he was a good friend of mine. He was lieutenant governor at the time, a real well thought of guy. But he was kind of the old school, and I was kind of the new school. He said, number one choice is you can talk. Some of his people had said, you know, if you talk to Brantley Harvey, if you drop out, he'll help you maybe get elected the next time, and you can work on it. That's one choice. Drop out, go to the lieutenant governor, tell him if he gets elected and help me in 4 years. And the second choice, he said, run directly against Harvey. Riley, 4%, Harvey, 35%. Now that sounds kind of dumb. I said, you know, this guy's supposed to be such a sharp pollster, and he's advised me about all this stuff. So anyhow, there were two other people in the race. There were 3 people in the race, and I was the 4th one. And I'm supposed to pick out Harvey and run against him, which I did. And lo and behold, I got in the second race, and I won by a large margin in the runoff. And honestly, I don't think I would have ever been elected governor without Peter Hart and his successful strategic plan. And Peter, I thank you for that right now. So to you all here, it's my personal pleasure to have my dear friend Peter Hart here tonight to share with us his quality research data and analysis regarding the mood of America in this 2016 presidential campaign. So please join me in welcoming him here. Peter?
Let me just say I'm delighted to be here, and there's maybe no greater honor than to have worked for Governor Riley. I have done over 500 campaigns in my career. I have never worked for anybody that gave me more pleasure or in whom I've got more pride. He represents absolutely the best in American politics. There are many people who are successful in politics. Few have the impact of changing the state the way he has changed South Carolina. It moved from an old economy to a new economy. It moved from an old education system to a new education system. All of those things were done because he was a quality person that people knew whether they were on one side of the aisle or the other. You could trust him, and he cared about the right thing. So thank you very, very much, Governor. I am most grateful. I'm less grateful for the introduction, not in terms of a lack of appreciation, but I have to admit that there might be a little sense that I'm an older person. I've been around for a while. And I have to explain, I come back to Furman, and I am so delighted to be here and honored. And it reminds me, I taught at the University of Pennsylvania, and in 2009, I got a sense of age in a different way. After my first class, a young co-ed came rushing up to me with great excitement and glee, and she says to me, "You've got to tell me the most exciting campaign you've ever been in. Was it Obama? Was it Kennedy? Or was it Roosevelt?" I'm saying Roosevelt. I wasn't even alive for Roosevelt. And she said, no, I meant Franklin, not Teddy. So I'm indeed delighted and honored to be here. And I gotta tell you, I come from a weird place. It's called Washington, D.C. And every town has its own culture. I know Charleston has its own culture. Certainly New York, it's all about money. In L.A., it's all about fame and everything else. Washington's about power. And you may have noticed Donald Trump did not have such a good week a week ago. And he actually made a speech in Washington. You may not have seen that. And he was on a big dais. And the waiter came up and put a pat of butter on Mr. Trump's plate. And he turned to the waiter and said, "Excuse me, can I have a second pat of butter?" And the waiter said, "Sorry, one pat per person." Donald Trump looked at him and said, "Maybe you don't know who I am." And the waiter said, "Nope, sorry, I don't." And he says, "I'm Donald Trump. Nobody has built bigger or more beautiful buildings than I have." And he says, "Furthermore, I was on The Apprentice show, and there's never been a greater show on television. And finally, I'm running for president of the United States." Waiter looked at him and said, "Maybe you don't know who I am." Mr. Trump looked up at him. He said, "No." He says, "I'm the man in charge of the butter." And in Washington, that's how things work. To be perfectly honest, it's all very much. So my question is, I look at this audience and I want to know, do the young people really understand? Does my lapel? Oh, I thought they said. Bingo! Thank you very much. You should see me with a computer if you think I'm bad on this. Okay, so the question is, which generation better understands America? And I thought it'd be helpful. I mean, Brent, you can help me out on this. Okay, Sarah, could you help me out on this? You just stay right there. Okay, no, stand up, you know. Okay, so here we go. You'll guess, what % of Americans have dinner with their family 5 nights a week?
Got to turn myself on. Okay. What percentage of Americans? Oh, I'm going to say 20%.
Higher or lower? Lower. Lower. And the answer is, you guys aren't too good right yet.
Oh, man.
Okay.
Bummer.
So that's 1 to nothing.
Really? 5 nights
okay,
a week?
So we'll start this time with Sarah. What percentage of Americans read a newspaper either online or with a paper newspaper a week, 3 days a week? 24. 24%. Lower or higher?
Lower.
71%.
Oh, man.
I hope these guys aren't running for office. Okay. Okay, Brent, you're up. Attend religious service once a week or more. What percentage of Americans? You're in South Carolina.
Yeah, once a week. I'm going to... 16%.
Higher. 40% of Americans.
Once a week.
Okay. What percentage have a personal profile on social media, Sarah? 75.
Higher. Oh, I can't get anything. That was good.
Okay,
That was very good.
Last question. What percentage of Americans have someone in the household who has a tattoo?
Is that me?
Yes, it is. You've been right on.
Accurate.
It's been unbelievable.
They want me on Family Feud. I know that. I'm going to say 35%.
40%.
Well, we were both kind of right.
Give Sarah a hand. And Brent, there are some lovely parting gifts for you, and we're delighted. Okay, we're going to talk about America. We're going to talk about where things are at, what's happening out there, what's there. And I want to start by just sort of picking up. And this audience is so marvelous because essentially we have, quote, 2 generations, the older generation, the younger generation. And we really are, as a country, in 2 different generations as such. If you look at this, essentially, the differences are vast. And when it comes to the question of church, or it comes to serving in the military, if it comes to newspaper reading, all of those things the older generation do. They're much more likely to do it. But then there's a whole other socialization in America that's going on. And if you look at this, paying bills online, tattoo, take a look at the difference on that. If you take a look at video games, shopping online, social media. We've divided into 2 different countries, 2 different generations. And the younger generation is obviously showing the way in terms of where we're headed as America. And you look at the institutions that were built up from the past, those are starting to go by the wayside. So we look at this election, and we can't look at it as just the same or no change. It's indeed a whole new life, and this comes into politics, and it's in the world everywhere. And what I want to talk about is sort of what's going to happen in terms of the race ahead. And I think there are 5 fundamentals that you need to understand. First is the direction of the country. And what you find out is that for the last 15 years, a majority of Americans have seen the country off on the wrong direction. Is it headed in the right direction or seriously off on the wrong track? And what we have is at this stage of the game, more than 3 out of 5 Americans say it's seriously off on the wrong track. And essentially, that's come from 9/11, and it's gone all the way through the system with the Iraq War, everything that's happened over the past 7 years with Obama. It's not partisan. It is both sides feel that something's very wrong. And when you look at this, it has an important cohort in terms of the election, and that is this election has been about anger. And it is anger in terms of what is happening in Washington. It's anger in terms of what's happening in Wall Street. It is a sense of both inequity in terms of income, and it is a sense that people's ability to move ahead, the sense of anxiety in terms of what's out there, all of those things make a huge difference. And you look at this, that's what's fueled the campaign of Donald Trump, but it's also fueled the campaign of Bernie Sanders. They are the two sides of the same coin. The third thing that is very much there is what's happened. And yesterday I had a marvelous group session with students, and I asked them, what's the most important thing that's happened in the last year and what's affected you? And more likely they were to talk about Paris and what it meant in terms of insecurity. And it's the sense that whether it's San Bernardino or Paris, there's a sense of fragility. And we have never felt that kind of insecurity. We know what it is to be a country at war. What we don't understand is what it's like to be a country under a terrorist attack. And that is overseeing this whole election. On the fourth element, it's America's place in the world. In the work that we did for NBC and the Wall Street Journal, we asked people to tell us, looking a generation ahead, which country do you think will be the strongest economic power? And when we asked this in 1995, looking 20 years ahead, 54% of Americans said it would be the United States, 3% said China. Today, it is 40% say the United States and 40% say China. So the sense that we would be ahead, that we would be in control, and that the future would be bright and everything would work out, we now have a sense of impending uncertainty. And that leads us to the last thing. I love to ask an audience, how many of you have had, I'll ask for those people who are out of college, have had a better life than your parents' generation? Hands up. Take a look around. Same parents for the moment. How many of you believe that your children will have a better life than your generation? Look at the change. And all of a sudden, by the way, see the man holding his hand up still? His kid has a trust fund. So life's looking pretty good for that kid. For the rest of us, not so certain. But all of this plays so much into what this is about. And that is, Americans are looking for their moorings. They're trying to get an understanding of where they're going to be and what it's about. So we look at this election, and there's a tendency to get all caught up with Donald Trump's ahead, Marco Rubio's catching up, there's a guy named Kasich coming along, how about Cruz, what about Bernie Sanders? I'm saying step back. Step back from the window and just look at this. This is going to tell us more about where we're going to end up and what's going to happen in terms of October. And 4 words capture what the campaign's all about. What are the 4 words, Liam? Who's got it? 4 words capture this campaign. What? I got it. Stand up. Make America great again. You need the students. We'd be nowhere without them. And you stop and think about it. Go back to the previous slide. It's about the direction of the country, a sense of uncertainty. It's about economic anxiety. It is about ISIS. It is about immigration. And you can say, oh, I hate Donald Trump, or I love Donald Trump. But if you look at those four words have captured an awful lot about the psyche of America in 2016. And so the ability to recognize who we are and what we're going through is important. And I just wanted to give you a sense of numbers. By the way, I get paid for each NBC Wall Street Journal mention that I do. So if you hear that mentioned a lot, they pay me 50 cents for each of it. And God, it's marvelous. I can spend it down at Starbucks, and it works out very well. But what it's all about is look at anger up at the top, especially with the dark red line. You've got 42% say, I feel angry. And that is underlying fear. And then you jump down one to the fact of anxious and uncertain, and you get 31% talking about this. And there's a sense that when you look at those two elements, those are driving this election very much. It is both the uncertainty of what's ahead, how do I plan, where do I go, what am I going to do, how do I pay for my child's college, how do I get my first job, what am I going to do in terms of housing. All of those things are wrapped up in there, and then you have the anger that we have a sense that whether it is the elite on Wall Street or government by donation, that somehow my voice is shut out. And so when I think about Bernie Sanders and when I think about Donald Trump, they're both playing to that. And so we think they're running two very different campaigns. One's more civilized than the other, but the fact of the matter is they're running exactly the same campaign. So where does that take us? You would think in this period of time, what would you say? Do you want somebody who's experienced, or do you want somebody new? How many say I want somebody that's experienced? Okay, how many say no, we need somebody new? Just a handful of hands up there. And what it comes down to, you stop and look at it. Essentially, by 61 to 36, the American public says, give me somebody that's going to, not experienced, okay? Don't tell me how many years Hillary Clinton has been in office. What concerns me is who's going to bring change, who's going to make it different, who's going to get at that. So you start to say, gee, what happened to Jeb Bush? What happened to Hillary Clinton? The answer is the public at this stage of the game is playing through their uncertainty and their unhappiness. Will it play all the way through? Maybe yes, maybe no. But a year ago, when I did a focus group out in Colorado, I came back and I said, everybody thinks they're going to go establishment. They are not going to go establishment in 2016. And so am I surprised by what I'm seeing? Not at all, because it's very much there. And you know the way you see it in other ways in our society. It's what I call amateur professionals. Stop and think about it. How many people own a fantasy team? Okay, sports team. You're an amateur professional, okay? You can't afford to own a team, but you have all of that. How many people are bloggers? Anybody a blogger in here? No bloggers. But all of a sudden, bloggers, they're the new reporters. You don't have to get a license. You don't have to do anything. That's all it takes. You stop and think about it. How many of you have used Uber? Ooh, invest in Uber very soon. Okay, in Uber, same thing. You don't need a taxi anymore. The only thing you need to do is go out there and become a driver. All of those things. So you say, well, I don't get it. It doesn't relate to all of this. Well, stop and think about it. Donald Trump, how much experience is he running for office? 0. And are people saying, oh, we couldn't elect him. That would be a disaster. Some of us feel that way. But in the main, we say, why not? Ben Carson, Carly Fiorina, all of this is a new face because essentially what we're saying is we're unhappy with what's going there. The fear and uncertainty. We ask a question and Gallup asks a question. Two different questions, and look at the results. On the right-hand side, Gallup says, do you feel that the distribution of money and wealth in the country today is fair, or do you feel that the money and wealth in the country should be more evenly distributed among a larger percentage of the people? By 2-to-1, the American public favors that. Whose candidacy is that? Whose candidacy? Bernie Sanders. Look at the other side. We ask an NBC Wall Street Journal question. Which concerns you more, the gap between the rich, the wealthiest Americans, and the rest of the country, or making the working class, middle and working class not being able to get ahead financially? 2-to-1, the American public says not being able to get ahead. Whose campaign? Donald Trump. So what's happening here? One saying, it's not about growing the pie, it's about making the pie more evenly divided. The other one says, no, 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 it's not about that, it's about growing the pie. They're both talking about a different element within the economy. And both of those elements sell, but it's really in the way in which it's put together and what's there. So you go from there, and essentially, there's the other element, and that is dealing with ISIS. And the hardest thing in my business is understanding how you measure public opinion on foreign policy. Because when you do foreign policy, the public really knows very little. If you said to the American public, tell us where Syria is, they'd say it's just above Finland and a little bit below South Africa, okay? And you say, oh, that's unbelievable. How can you even bother to poll opinion? Because the public tells you psychologically where they're at, what it's about, and why it's important. And what this shows us is the American public as a whole says we need to be more aggressive in dealing with ISIS. And yet you see the basic divisions and what is happening in the two primaries. If you look at the Democrats, by a small margin, Democrats say, no, no, no. What we should be doing is we're too aggressive. We're going too far. And if you look at independents, they're a little bit more towards aggressive policies. But then you look at Republicans, and they are overwhelmingly that we need to get more aggressive. So you're saying, how do we get a consensus policy? It's very difficult in this kind of situation. And you listen to each side's candidates, and they're pushing it. And that's one of the biggest problems, isn't it, Governor? That there's no sense of consensus, there's no sense of how we work together or how we put together this. And we're in a period of war and peace. So all of this leads us to who's going to win in 2016. I know the answer, but I'm not allowed to spoil the surprise for anybody. Instead, what you need to understand here is we're very evenly divided. So the idea that this is going to be a runaway one way or another, I don't know who are going to be the nominees. My tendency is to say it's going to be a razor-tight election. It's going to look much more like 2004 and 2000 than it's going to look like 2012 or even 2008. And what it says to me is the election is very much ahead of us rather than the election being behind us at this stage of the game. So as I look at this, you'd start to look at the candidates. And what I've done is to provide a perspective. How do they look compared to the candidates in the last two rounds? And you look at Donald Trump in terms of his personal rating and what share of the vote. And this is our national poll done in January. Who was it done by? Oh, NBC and the Wall Street Journal. And indeed, you look at this, and Donald Trump is running a little bit better than Gingrich or Romney and around the same level or a little bit better than John McCain, going all the way back to 2008. If you look at Hillary Clinton, she's actually doing exactly the same as she was doing in 2008, and Bernie Sanders is doing as well as Barack Obama was doing. So you look at this and you get a sense, no, these candidates are not much more rejected and much more polarized, et cetera. Within their own parties, they're doing as well as anybody else. But what's the point of talking about this unless we talk about the Sun King? And that would be Donald Trump. He is the Louis XIV of American politics, okay? You know, what is so fascinating, and by the way, I made this chart about a week and a half ago, and by this stage of the game, Ben Carson would be a little spot just right up there. Carly Fiorina's disappeared. Christie's out of there. Kasich would be a little larger, and Rubio probably a little bit smaller. But what is so fascinating is that if you look at this, Donald Trump's broken every rule of American politics. Essentially, you look and he's got no contributors. He's a total freelance candidate. He has no policies. He only has slogans. And what's so fascinating, in the age of incivility, his rudeness and insults are celebrated as candor. And you stop and think about it. If I had written these things out 2 years ago and said there would be a candidate who could come on the scene, do the kinds of things that he has done, and that he would be acceptable or a leader, you'd say it would never happen. But it tells us so much about the times, and it tells us so much about where we're at. You look at this, and everybody wants to know who's going to win. I can't tell you who's going to win. Why? Because it would ruin the surprise, right? But here's the one thing I would tell you you should recognize. When you look at Donald Trump, everybody looks at the numerator, and I think you should be looking at the denominator. The bigger the field, the stronger he looks. Why? Because his 30% is twice as much as John Kasich's 15%. But what we discovered is as the field narrows, his percentage goes up, but everybody else's percentage goes up much more quickly. So that in a two-person race, we actually show Ted Cruz beating Donald Trump, and we show Donald Trump ahead of Rubio back a few weeks ago. But I think the way you have to understand and analyze this is how elastic is the Trump base. I would tell you it is less elastic than people think, and things have not changed as much. So you look at this, and what it comes down to is a really interesting point, and that is we ask a question, how do you feel about each of the following candidates? Very positive, somewhat positive, neutral, somewhat negative, very negative. If you look at Donald Trump in July of 2015, when he was just starting his campaign, 26% of the American public had a positive viewpoint, 56% had a negative viewpoint. You've gone through the whole campaign. Has he changed people's attitudes? What's fascinating to me is you come 7, 8 months later, and what you find out is he's 29% positive, 58% negative. So the same obstacle that he faced in the game, he still faces. He has moved up with Republicans. He is much more acceptable to Republican voters than he was. But in terms of the electorate as a whole, he hasn't moved up. It is not any better. Then you go to the question of how does he stack up in a head-to-head? Well, if you look at this, his numbers in terms of against Hillary Clinton, and remember Hillary Clinton's been going down, those numbers are exactly the same as they were. They were a 10-point lead. They remain a 10-point lead. So what I want to tell you is we're celebrating, we're hearing everything about Trump, et cetera. for all the good and all the bad that he's done in this campaign, Americans' attitudes, if they're negative, have remained pretty frozen negative. If they were positive, they remain very positive. So you look at this, and it comes out of this, and essentially what happens is when people talk about what kind of candidate is a person who's insulting and has the wrong approach on the issues, or a person that tells it like it is and has the right approach. If you're a Democrat, you say, this guy's insulting and he's terrible. If you're a Republican, at worst you say, I may not like his language, but he's telling it like it is, or he's doing the right thing. Very polarizing, very much there. The other thing I love to do are focus groups. How many people know what focus groups are? How many have been in a focus group? Great, we'd like you back again. You were a very good respondent. Focus groups are aimed at getting qualitative feelings. What do you think about a candidate? And instead of counting numbers, what we do is we ask questions that help us to understand what people are thinking. I'll try it here. Why not? Okay, Donald Trump. He's a member of your family, Liam. Who is he?
Uncle.
An uncle. Good uncle? Bad uncle? What kind of uncle?
A fun uncle, but not the best.
Okay. Who is he?
He's a distant cousin.
A distant cousin. Who is he?
A grandfather.
And a grandfather in what way?
He's very distant.
Very distant. Who is he?
He's a grandfather with extreme dementia.
Oh, a grandfather with extreme dementia. Okay. But you understand what's going on here? When you start to talk to people about someone, and when they talk about Donald Trump, as people said, he's my father-in-law. You don't want to be around him. He's the middle child. He's the crazy uncle. He's my husband. He hollers at me, but then he spoils me. And so you get a sense of the relationship that people have. And when they ask to use words or phrases, they use words like strong, outspoken, disturbed, divisive, loud, and hothead. Those are the things that give you a sense of what he's been doing and where he's at. In terms of this, family member, as I said, middle child, crazy uncle. Oh, somebody said a father-in-law that I don't want to be around. Then I ask a second question. Ready, Sarah? You're on the griddle again. Okay. If there were a fictional character, superhero, comic, anything else, oh, there it is. Who would Donald Trump be in any kind of comic, superhero, etc.? Anybody got one?
I have one.
Joker, like it. Okay, who else? What? The Hulk. We'll come right back to that.
Voldemort.
Who?
Voldemort.
Okay, I like it, and I'm not sure what it is. Okay, yes. Lex Luthor, excellent. What are you guys all saying? Here's what the American public says. He's the Hulk, and that is, you'll never want to get him mad. Richie Rich, Tasmanian Devil, and then I love, one person said, oh, I'm sorry, I must just skip through. Okay, there we go. My favorite is the last one, Dennis the Menace. You caught the hairdo right there. So it's a sense of how much polarization is there and who he is. Now, they're both attracted to him and repelled by him. Let me turn and now talk about what I think faces the Republican Party. I think the Republican Party has a huge challenge ahead of them. I think the Democratic Party has a candidate challenge ahead of them. And the Republican Party, when I look at it, feelings about the Republican Party have been negative overwhelmingly for a long period of time. By 3-2, the American public say they have a negative point of view. How do they feel about the congressional leadership? They felt 3-1 negative. How do they feel about their candidates? You look, essentially, they're unproven, untested, and yes, we want a new approach, but can they make the threshold? It's different to be in the primary than it is to be in the general election. When you get to the general election, people then start to put people, they're either ready for the Oval Office or they're not. That's a challenge for the Republicans. And the fourth point that I would make, and again, I say it with caution because I'm in South Carolina where it may not meet with everybody's approval, but you look at where America is going on a series of issues, whether it be same-sex marriage or immigration or restrictions on abortion or involvement of religious groups in politics. In each of those issues, the Republicans have staked out a position where essentially the majority of the American public has gone the other way. And I think for the Republican Party, the challenge ahead in 2016 is how do they get back to a constituency of tomorrow, not only a constituency of yesterday. So the ability to be able to talk to young people, the ability to be able to talk to particularly Hispanic minorities, and the ability to be able to reach into suburban women. All of those challenges are facing the Republicans. But let me not suggest that it's only the Republicans. Let me talk about Jenny Howard. I love Jenny Howard. She was one of my respondents in Aurora, Colorado. I talked to her in January of 2015. And when I went out, I talked to her. I found out she was a 43-year-old married housewife with an 11-year-old child, I think. She did actually have a child. And she was an accountant. Her husband was out of work. And he'd been out of work for over a year. And when she heard the Republican leadership, in that case, John Boehner, say, anybody who wants a job has a job, she says, my husband's been looking for a job for a year. I don't have a job. And she's through and through a Republican. She voted for Mitt Romney. She voted for John McCain. She voted for Cory Gardner. She voted straight through. And what really was bothering this woman, as much as anything else, was a sense of immigration. And this is before the immigration issue and the wall. There was no Donald Trump and any of that. And so I went through all of this, and I had in my mind, I know who she is. I've seen her. This is a good Republican woman who has strong, good Christian values, etc. And then I said to her, okay, tell me something. You can meet any one candidate that you want to meet. Who do you want to meet? Who'd she say? An interesting choice. Elizabeth Warren. And I said, whoa, what is going on there? And you know what it was? Essentially, she says, I'm hurting. I can't make the payments. I have $100,000 in student loans, and it's costing me $1,300 a month. And she said, that's twice the size of my mortgage. And it's the sense that she was looking for somebody who had a sense of what she was up against. There was no Bernie Sanders at this stage of the game. Fast forward, never talked to her again, phoned her in January this year, 1 year to the date before inauguration. And I said, hey, how are you, Jenny? Been a year. And I said to her, tell me something. Your husband back at work? She said, yep, got it through the family, but boy, it's made a huge difference. And I said, what's bothering you? And she said, remember I talked about immigration? She says, it really bothers me. She said, let me just tell you something. I have a lot of compassion as I see these people coming out of Syria, but I worry about my own country, and I worry about feeling like an infidel in my own country. And you could feel it. And where was she going to vote? What do you think? Donald Trump is what you thought. And she then said to me, but that's the only area I agree with Donald Trump on. I think he's a bull in a china shop. He would be a terrible president. I could never support him. I think it would be a disaster. So I said, well, who are you for? And she said, Bernie Sanders. I don't know where he is on immigration, but I don't think he's there. And I said, what is it? She said, he's the only guy who is talking in a positive way. He's the only guy who understands what I'm going through. And what I'm trying to tell you is we go through this and we categorize people. People have very complicated stories, very difficult stories, huge challenges. And this election has so long to go. It is a winding road, and everybody thinks we've just seen the last turn because John Kasich is coming up and Rubio's going down. This has got a huge way to go, and what we learn is that all of these things are hugely difficult. So the problems facing the Democrats are the American people want change. Every election is either continuity or change. And what we learn here is the American public want a different direction from Barack Obama, and they think the country's headed in the wrong direction. When it comes to which party's the best on the economy, the Republicans are seen as better. Which party's better on foreign policy? The two big key issues, the Republicans are ahead. And then the biggest problem, Hillary Clinton. With independents, only a third of independents would say, yes, I'd like to see her as president. Among men, it's only 35%, and among whites, it's only 37%. So the ability for Hillary Clinton to reach a larger constituency is huge. And why is that happening? Well, essentially, everybody thinks this is something that's just happening now. The same polarization that was a problem for Hillary Clinton in 2007 changed when she was Secretary of State. We saw her in a very different light. Now it's gone more negative than it was in 2007 and 2008. People are uncertain. They're not feeling nearly as comfortable. When I ask people, what member of the family is she? To some, she's a sister. To others, she may be a friendly aunt. But to others, she's the intimidating aunt or the wife's sister. As somebody put it, said, she's the extremely opinionated, graceful at times, and totally rip your head off at other times. So it's that kind of polarization that is out there. And what I did is the three pictures of Hillary. We don't have a clear single shot of Hillary. Some days she's this, some days she's that. And what it comes down to is when you look at the American public, essentially what they tell you is they think she's competent. They have no doubt that she can do the job. In difficult times, this is not about a 3 a.m. call. This is about a person who could do it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Public does not doubt that. They may disagree with her policies, but no doubt about her competence. On compassion, very divided. Does she really understand me? Does she care about me? Dick Riley can tell you all the great things, but it hasn't been communicated to the American public at this stage. And then you get to the last part. Can you trust her? And at this stage of the game, the American public, by 2-to-1, say, I can't trust her. And so you say to her, well, who would she be as a fictional character? And essentially what comes out here is she ends up as Claire Underwood in House of Cards, Olivia Pope cleaning up all the mess and scandal, Lando Calrissian, and you look at this, and those are the challenges that come out of this. So you move forward to this election, and we really end up with a series of questions of where we're going to head. And I think there are going to be 5 questions the American public is going to try and figure out. And that's going to help sort out what this election is about. First and foremost, everybody wants economic stability and economic growth. They want to know who's going to be able to make the economy work for me. That's what they're trying to figure out. That is at the central part of it. It is always the central part of an election. It is going to be important. Second, people want to be able to have a Congress that suddenly works, that knows how to get things done, and that it will, in one way or another, stand up to the special interests. The third thing the American public is working on and trying to figure out is where do we come in terms of national defense and immigration. Essentially, there is all kinds of insecurity about our own security. And what the public is looking for is something that no politician can give them, is self-assurance that things are going to be okay. But what they're trying to know is who's going to protect us and who's going to help. So when Donald Trump says, I'm going to build a wall, essentially, I don't think the American public think that he's going to be able to build this wall, but they like the sense of commitment that he may go after that. The fourth thing they want to know is Hillary Clinton going to be more of the same, or is she going to represent a change? They know she can do the job. They're uncertain that they can count on her providing a new leaf and a different direction. And the last thing, I think, for the Republicans, and that is, can they talk about tomorrow? So here we are at the beginning of the primary season. Indeed, what we've learned is that there are so many questions, so many important things that are going to happen, and indeed, there is no easy answer. And I always follow, in this kind of situation, the advice of Mae West. And Mae West said, when given the choice between 2 evils, I'll take the one I haven't tried before. So thank you very much, and I'll be delighted to answer questions. Okay.
Well, thank you very much, Peter. Now it's our opportunity to ask him questions. We do have 2 roving microphones. John Bleed's back here, and JP is over here. So what you need to do is, I will recognize you. So you need to raise your hand and catch my eye. I will recognize you and then wait for one of these 2 gentlemen to get there so that everybody in the room can hear the question. Who will be first? I look for students first. They're the ones that, over here. Oh, yes. Liam, please stand up. Here comes John.
So one of the questions surrounding Donald Trump is his potential to draw in non-traditional voters or people who haven't voted before, people who have become disaffected or alienated by the system. And do you think that group of voters, do you think that's a sizable group of voters that will be significant for him in the long run?
Assuming that, well, let's start with the primaries. I think he has the ability in everything he does to stimulate and encourage a voter turnout. And I think that what we saw in terms of all the crowds in the both in the debates and in terms of his audiences says there are people that are more interested. Anytime he's on television, and he's on every moment, the ratings go up. It is like going to the Indianapolis or Daytona 500. We're all waiting for that crash to happen, and we don't want to miss it. And to be perfectly honest, you look at this, I think that he stimulates more votes in the primary because he's there. But against that, I honestly believe as the field narrows, his difficulty is being able to get over the bar because it looks so like he's doing so well, but the fact of the matter is it's only because all that other votes divided. So we'll see as we move down the road. But I think if he were actually to be the nominee, I think you would have a very large turnout in the fall, surprisingly large.
Yes, ma'am. Here comes JP.
I think that the candidates are making promises they can't keep as far as like how much power they're actually going to have, because I mean, the president, it's shared power. So do you think that they're kind of coming off as like, I have all this power to make all this change?
Yeah, but they've been doing that for years. No, what it comes down to is I don't know that the American public looks at each of these pledges and promises and said, this is going to happen. What they're looking at is for a direction and a sense of what somebody wants to do. And I don't know that somebody looks at marvelous programs that Hillary Clinton may be proposing and saying, well, she'll clearly do it. But what they care about is, does this person understand the burdens that I'm under? Are they going to have a bigger government? Are they going to do something about my taxes? Are they going to protect me? It is the basic fundamentals, but I don't think that the specifics become as important. There will always be an issue that divides the electorate where you end up with a Republican on one side and the Democrat on the other, and people will all say, well, I'm voting for him for X or for her for reason Y, but in reality, I think it's less that they expect the specific and more they're looking for the direction. Obviously, when it comes to health care and the promises of Obama, it happened. In a lot of instances, these things don't happen. The best campaign that was run in terms of promise, quote, and delivery would have to be Ronald Reagan's campaign in 1980. Because what he said is, I'm going to build up defense, I'm going to make government smaller, and I'm going to cut your taxes. He did not tell us that he was going to build up our deficit, but the other things that he said he was going to do, he went out and did. So in some cases, it gets followed through.
See, I thought you were going to say Morning in America was the best promise, because as far as I know, there were mornings after that. So, you know,
exactly.
There was somebody in the middle here, a gentleman that I missed, but yes, I'll take you. Please stand up.
You touched on the media in one of the previous questions. The constant coverage of everything candidates say, does it really make an impact to the answers you get in your polls, or have people kind of already decided before they hear that constant analysis of everything that's happened?
Now, what's fascinating about the polls in 2016 is, one, how much attention people are paying, and they're paying a tremendous amount of attention. And the second element is there are no moorings. When you're in a primary campaign, one day you're for Marco Rubio, the next day you are for Ted Cruz, and you say, well, how could they do it? And if you listen to the Fox or MSNBC or CNN, you listen to people say, well, I can't decide if I'm going to take the independent ballot and vote for, if I'm going to vote for Ted Cruz or if I'm going to vote for Bernie Sanders. And you say, oh my God, what are you thinking? You know, they aren't, but there are so many different factors that go in. And so does the coverage make a difference? Yeah, it makes a huge difference. And one of the problems in doing polls is events happen right after we do a poll, and we come out with the poll, but it doesn't reflect the event. And so consequently, at the very end, you caught Rubio's downslide, but in so many cases, we won't be able to do it.
With all the media hype that everybody's paying attention because it's on television all the time, will this have a trickle down to local? Everybody's unhappy with the Congress. Is this going to affect congressional seats and local state governments?
An excellent question. I think you get into a mood, and it does affect from top to bottom. I think this is a change election versus a continuity election. I think it'll be harder for incumbents. I'm less likely to think that it always affects all the way down to local races, the mayor or the city council, because I think they're decided on very different things. But when it comes to congressional, I can see a lot of movement in terms of the Senate. The problem with the House of Representatives is so many seats are already locked in by essentially the drawing of the districts, gerrymandering, and therefore you can't see it. But my guess is you're going to see some change. One of the things is, will we have a third-party candidate, whether it's Mayor Bloomberg or somebody else? I don't know, but I would tell you there is a double-digit amount of votes out there for a third-party candidate in 2016. And if Mayor Bloomberg were to run, I would tell you Hillary Clinton would lose if she were the nominee. I would tell you if Donald Trump decides to run because he doesn't win the nomination, that means that Hillary Clinton will be the next president of the United States. So third party, there is a dissatisfaction that will play out. If somebody runs as a third-party candidate, I think you'll see double-digit vote for them, assuming there's someone.
Craig.
So one of the biggest criticisms of American democracy is the fact that we have the lowest voter turnout rates and that not many people participate in the political process. Of course, we are seeing large record-breaking turnouts. Is this something that's just special for this year because of all the controversy, or is this a trend that will move forward?
Great question. I think in some respects it would be helpful to see it move forward. I think what's happening at this stage of the game is we've had so much media attention, and you look at the debates. If somebody had said to me 25 million people are going to tune in on a Tuesday night to watch a debate with all these characters, I would have said never going to happen. But the fact of the matter is they did tune in, and they've been tuning in to one after another after another. And I think, again, it's a Donald Trump phenomenon and an anti-Hillary and a pro-Hillary phenomenon. People are more engaged. I think that means for this election. I think the voter participation in off years continues to be abysmal, but certainly if you look at 2008 and 2012, voter participation is a lot better than it used to be.
Yes, you do. Here it comes. Meet him in the middle. That's good.
So kind of a follow-up to Craig's question. I'm a political science major, so I often read how the American public is uninformed, misinformed, and not involved in politics and current events. So my question to you is, do you have hope for the American voters?
I have infinite hope. You have to understand something. If you're in my business, you've got to believe in people. I mean, tomorrow night, I'm going to do a focus group with 12 people who are going to vote in the Republican primary. Some people watch this and they say to me, can you believe what idiots people are and what they believe? And I am always amazed at how they get to a basic truth of where they're coming from. And so I've spent my life believing in voters, and I recognize that they make some funny decisions. But overall, in terms of getting to the place that America should be, or they feel that they should be, I think they do it well. They may not be well informed in our opinions, but in terms of attitudes and direction. They would fail probably any of Austin Reed's questions or exams, but in the end of the day, I think that the American public is something I believe in tremendously, and I think they, in the end, in almost every election in my lifetime, I think it's turned out the way the American public wanted it to turn out. So one vote for the American voter.
Thank you.
I want someone from way back there. Does anybody have, in the dark corner of Greenville County? Yes, sir. Here comes JP.
Variable that you're looking at as you survey the competitive Senate races to see which way it'll flip this time?
Question is on the Senate races. To be perfectly honest, I think it's going to have an awful lot to do with turnout. And the question is, which side is more motivated to vote? If I'm looking at groups, the groups that I'm looking at as important are going to be suburban voters, particularly suburban women, and I'm looking at independents as much as anything else. Those are going to be two absolutely critical groups. The Democrats need to pick up 4 seats and hold the presidency in order to win the Senate. I actually think the Democrats are going to win. Maybe that is a lark or whatever else it is, but from my looking at the races at this stage of the game, I think the Democrats are in better position to actually return and carry the Senate. That does not mean that I'm positive that they will win the presidency.
Last questions from back here. Yes, sir.
I recall reading a book, probably came out late 70s by Richard Scammon, called The Real Majority, the Voter is Hero in American Politics. And he had devoted a career, and I think he was a political scientist, to studying precincts all over the country, in inner city, rural, and so forth. And the conclusion that Dick Scammon reached was that the Americans are inherently moderate in how we vote, and generally vote the issues that really matter to us, seem to be able to cut through all the noise. And he had a wonderful conclusion, which was the Americans are the spectators in the sport of American politics and insist it be played between the 40-yard lines. And every time either party strayed from the middle and got out to the left or right too far, there was a corrective election that brought that party back. I'm just curious over your career if you're seeing some shift in that, because the standard of living has fallen in this country since the energy crisis of 1973. And I believe that's got to contribute to the general sense of most of us that things aren't going well, because we're losing ground except for a few privileged few. And I wonder if that is driving us, along with other issues, to get outside the 40-yard lines and the way in which we're voting.
It's a marvelous question, a great question to close on. Richard Scammon, who indeed is one of the great scholars, or was one of the great scholars, wrote about the real majority, and he talked about a Dayton housewife as the example of this. And as you've nicely put it, he talked about the 40-yard lines. And indeed, America is essentially a moderate, and I think it's a middle-right country versus a middle-left country. But what has happened in American politics, from my point of view, is that in social policies, we have pushed much further to the left. And essentially, in part, it has to do with population change. It has to do with a new set of values from younger people. It has to do with a greater sense of empathy and a greater sense of diversity. All of that has moved things in one respect in social policy. In terms of economic policy, I think it really has to do with a sense of insecurity. I don't know that that moves us more right or more left. I think it moves us more towards questioning the established what I call economic forces that are there. And on the other side of it, in the end of the day, what it comes down to is a security element. And in terms of security, essentially, America is really trying to figure out, how do you become safe? What do we need to do in order to reach that sense of safety, et cetera? And in terms of that, I don't think we've lit and we found what's the proper balance. So we've got all three of those forces working one way or another that we're trying to figure out. And what makes 2016 such an important election and a fascinating election is that it's not the most important election that we'll ever have, and it's not this or that, because everybody's always told this is the critical election. But it is going to give us what I think is a sense of where that light is going to go. We're going to get a better sense of where we're headed. Unfortunately, I happen to be in the position of believing that this is not going to be an election that is going to revolutionize American politics. I think that we have been in an era that started in, I would say, maybe I would start with the Clinton administration in 1992 and move forward. And it's been a period that has been very difficult. It's been a period of, instead of great forward movement and sense of security, I think it's been a period of insecurity. And what I think we're trying to figure out is how do we get to an even keel? How do we get back to where we want to be going? And so we say, make America great again. Well, obviously, Donald Trump may not be the right individual, but the point here is there is a point there that the public is trying to figure out. If not, how do we get to be great again? But how do we get America back on track? And I thank you ever so much for having me tonight. I'm honored.
Thank you, Peter Hart.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Emily has a gift for you. Thank you very much. Thank you, folks.